Welcome to Pigeon Healthy. If you're watching this video, chances are you've noticed one or more of your pigeons showing signs of respiratory problems. Maybe you've heard wheezing when they breathe. Maybe you've seen nasal discharge, clear or cloudy, coming from their nostrils. Maybe they're making clicking sounds, or they seem to be breathing with their beaks open. Maybe they're lethargic, sitting fluffed up, not interested in flying. These are all signs that something is going on with the respiratory system, and if you're a pigeon keeper, you know how quickly respiratory problems can escalate. Respiratory issues are one of the most common health challenges in pigeon keeping. They affect racing pigeons, show pigeons, fancy breeds, backyard flocks, young birds, old birds, everyone. The respiratory system in birds is complex and efficient, but it's also vulnerable. Birds have air sacs that extend throughout their body, even into their bones, which makes them incredibly efficient flyers, but also means that respiratory infections can spread quickly and become systemic. Now, when respiratory problems appear, many pigeon keepers immediately reach for antibiotics, tylosin, doxycycline, enrofloxacin. These are common choices, and yes, antibiotics have their place. If you have a severe bacterial respiratory infection, if birds are rapidly declining, if there's an outbreak affecting multiple birds, antibiotics may be necessary and life-saving. But here's the problem: antibiotics are often used too quickly, too frequently, and without proper diagnosis. Many respiratory symptoms in pigeons aren't caused by bacteria at all. They're caused by viruses, fungi, environmental irritants, or simply mucus buildup from damp conditions. Antibiotics don't help with any of those. Worse, overuse of antibiotics contributes to resistance, disrupts gut bacteria, and can weaken birds over time. So what's the alternative? What can you do when you notice early respiratory symptoms, when you want to support your birds naturally, when you want to avoid reaching for antibiotics unless absolutely necessary? That's what today's video is about. I'm going to introduce you to a plant that's been used for centuries in traditional medicine to treat respiratory problems in both humans and animals. It's called Mullein, and it might just become one of the most valuable tools in your natural pigeon health toolkit. Mullein is not some exotic, hard-to-find plant. It grows wild across Europe, Asia, and North America. In Turkey, it's known as psychorkum, which literally means cow's tail, referring to the shape of the flower spike. You've probably walked past Mullein dozens of times without realizing what it was. It's that tall plant with a thick, upright flower spike covered in small yellow flowers and large, soft, fuzzy leaves at the base. The leaves feel almost like velvet or felt, covered in fine hairs. It typically grows in disturbed soils, along roadsides, in fields, on hillsides. It's considered a weed by many people, but to herbalists and traditional healers, it's medicine. The botanical name is Verbascum thapsus, though there are other species in the Verbascum genus that have similar properties. Mullein is a biennial plant, which means it has a 2-year life cycle. In the first year, it produces a rosette of large, fuzzy leaves close to the ground. In the second year, it sends up a tall flower stalk that can reach 1 to 2 meters high, covered in bright yellow flowers that bloom gradually from bottom to top throughout the summer. For medicinal purposes, we're primarily interested in the leaves, though the flowers also have uses. So what makes Mullein special for respiratory health? The leaves contain several active compounds that work together to support the respiratory system. There are saponins, which act as natural expectorants, meaning they help loosen and bring up mucus. There are mucilage compounds, which are soothing and coat irritated tissues. There are flavonoids like hesperidin and verbascicide, which have anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. There are also tannins and various glycosides. Together, these compounds create a multi-action effect on the respiratory system. Let me explain in simple terms what happens when you give Mullein to a pigeon with respiratory issues. First, the expectorant action helps thin and loosen mucus that's accumulated in the airways. Thick mucus is a major problem in respiratory illness. It blocks airways, makes breathing difficult, and creates an environment where bacteria and fungi can grow. By helping to expel this mucus naturally, you're clearing the airways and making it easier for the bird to breathe. Second, the mucilage compounds soothe and protect irritated mucous membranes. When airways are inflamed from infection or irritation, they become red, swollen, and painful. The soothing action of Mullein reduces this inflammation and provides a protective coating. Third, the anti-inflammatory and mild antimicrobial properties help address the underlying causes of respiratory irritation, whether that's mild bacterial presence, fungal spores, or general inflammation from environmental factors. Now, I want to be very clear about something important. Mullein is not a cure for severe respiratory infections. If your pigeon has a serious bacterial infection like Mycoplasma, chlamydia, or a severe E. coli respiratory infection, Mullein alone is not going to cure it. You need veterinary intervention and likely antibiotics. But Mullein excels in several specific situations. It's excellent for prevention during high-risk times like cold, damp weather when mucus buildup is common. It's valuable for early intervention when you notice mild symptoms like slight discharge or occasional sneezing. It's helpful for supportive care alongside veterinary treatment to ease symptoms and support recovery. It's useful for chronic low-grade respiratory issues where repeated antibiotic use isn't appropriate. And it's beneficial for clearing residual mucus after an infection has been treated to help the bird fully recover. Let me walk you through some common scenarios where Mullein is particularly useful. Scenario 1. Seasonal dampness. In many climates, autumn and spring bring increased humidity, morning fog, and damp conditions. This is when you often see an increase in respiratory symptoms, even in otherwise healthy birds. The dampness causes mucus to accumulate, and this mucus becomes a breeding ground for problems. Using Mullein preventively during these damp seasons, you can help keep airways clear and reduce the risk of infections taking hold. Scenario 2. Post-race or post-show stress. Racing pigeons that have flown hard or show pigeons that have traveled to exhibitions undergo significant stress. Stress temporarily suppresses immune function, making birds more susceptible to respiratory issues. Additionally, exposure to unfamiliar birds at races or shows increases disease exposure. Using Mullein for a few days after these events can support respiratory health during this vulnerable period. Scenario 3. Molting season. Molting is energetically expensive and stressful for birds. During molting, immune function can be somewhat suppressed, and birds are more vulnerable to health issues. Supporting the respiratory system during molting helps birds get through this demanding time more smoothly. Scenario 4. Young birds. Squabs and young birds are still developing their immune systems and are more susceptible to respiratory issues. Mild respiratory support with Mullein during weaning and early independence can be beneficial, though dosages must be adjusted for their smaller size. Scenario 5. Chronic mild symptoms. Some birds develop chronic low-grade respiratory issues that aren't severe enough to warrant continuous antibiotic treatment, but are persistent enough to affect quality of life and performance. These birds may benefit from regular Mullein support to manage symptoms and improve breathing comfort. Now let's talk about how to actually use Mullein for your pigeons. There are several preparation methods, and the one you choose depends on your specific situation and what's practical for your setup. The most common method is preparing a Mullein leaf tea or infusion. Here is exactly how to do it. Start with dried Mullein leaves. You can purchase these from herbal suppliers, or if you have access to Mullein plants, you can harvest and dry your own. When harvesting, choose leaves from healthy plants growing away from roadsides or areas that may have been sprayed with chemicals. Pick leaves in dry weather, mid-morning after dew has evaporated. Choose leaves that are green and healthy, not yellowed or damaged. The fuzzy leaves can be slightly irritating to sensitive skin, so some people wear gloves when handling large quantities, though this isn't usually necessary for small amounts. To dry Mullein leaves, lay them in a single layer on a clean surface in a warm, dry, well-ventilated area out of direct sunlight. A screen or drying rack works well. The leaves are quite thick, so drying takes longer than thin-leaved herbs, usually about 1 to 2 weeks depending on humidity. The leaves are fully dry when they're crispy and crumble easily. Store dried Mullein leaves in an airtight container in a cool, dark place. Properly stored, they maintain potency for about 1 year. To prepare Mullein tea for pigeons, measure out 1 to 2 tablespoons of dried Mullein leaves. If the leaves are whole and large, you can crumble them by hand into smaller pieces, but you don't need to powder them. Place the leaves in a glass or ceramic container. Pour 1 liter of boiling water over the leaves. Cover the container and let steep for 15 to 20 minutes. This allows time for the beneficial compounds to extract into the water. After steeping, you need to strain the liquid very carefully. This is important with Mullein because the fine hairs on the leaves can come off into the liquid, and these tiny hairs can be irritating if ingested. Use a very fine strainer, coffee filter, or several layers of cheesecloth to strain out not just the leaves but also any fine hairs. What you're left with is a golden yellow to pale brown liquid with a mild, slightly sweet, earthy smell. Allow this to cool to room temperature before using. For administration, there are a few methods. Method 1 is adding the Mullein tea to drinking water. For general respiratory support or prevention, add 100 milliliters of Mullein tea to 1 liter of drinking water. Provide this mixture for 3 consecutive days, then return to regular water for 4 days, then repeat the cycle. This creates a pattern of 3 days on, 4 days off. For birds showing mild respiratory symptoms, you can use a stronger concentration of 150 milliliters of tea per liter of water, provided for 5 to 7 consecutive days. After 7 days of use, take a break of at least 1 week. Method 2 is direct oral administration. For birds with more significant symptoms, or if you want to ensure a specific bird gets an adequate dose, you can give the Mullein tea directly. Use a dropper or small syringe without a needle. Give approximately 1 to 2 milliliters per pigeon, once or twice daily, for 5 to 7 days. Administer the liquid slowly and carefully to avoid aspiration. Make sure the bird swallows between drops. Method 3 is mixing with food. You can lightly moisten feed with Mullein tea so that the herbs are consumed along with the food. Use just enough tea to dampen the seeds slightly, not to make them soggy. Some keepers sprout seeds and rinse them with Mullein tea before feeding. This method works well for flocks where treating individual birds isn't practical. Now let's talk about steam inhalation, which is another highly effective method for respiratory support. Steam inhalation helps deliver the beneficial compounds directly to the respiratory tract, loosening mucus and soothing irritated airways. Here's how to do it safely. Prepare a strong Mullein infusion using 3 to 4 tablespoons of dried leaves per liter of water, steeped for 20 minutes and strained. Pour this hot but not boiling infusion into a container. Place the container in a small enclosed space with the affected bird. This could be a transport crate, a small cage, or even a cardboard box with air holes. The idea is to create a space where the bird is exposed to the steam, without being so confined that they become stressed. Never make the steam so hot that it could burn. The steam should be warm and comfortable, not scalding. Allow the bird to be in this steamy environment for 5 to 10 minutes. Watch the bird constantly. If they show any signs of distress, panting excessively, or trying frantically to escape, remove them immediately. Some birds tolerate steam therapy well, others find it stressful. You can repeat steam treatment once or twice daily for 3 to 5 days. For birds with respiratory congestion, steam therapy is particularly effective for loosening thick mucus in the upper respiratory tract. Some keepers also use dried mullein leaves as a nest box herb. Adding a small amount of dried, finely crumbled mullein leaves to nest boxes during breeding season or to the loft floor in damp weather can provide ongoing mild respiratory support through inhalation of the aromatic compounds. Use sparingly, just a light sprinkling, as too much can create dust. Let's talk about dosages based on age and size, because this is important for safety and effectiveness. For adult pigeons of average size, which is roughly 300 to 500 grams, the doses I've mentioned are appropriate. For young birds from weaning to about 3 months old, reduce doses by half. So if an adult would get 2 milliliters of tea directly, a young bird gets 1 milliliter. If an adult mixture is 100 milliliters per liter of water, for young birds use 50 milliliters per liter. For squabs still in the nest being fed by parents, do not give Mullein directly. Instead, treat the parents, and the babies will receive benefits through crop milk. For larger breeds like giant runts or king pigeons, which can weigh 600 to 800 grams or more, you can increase dosages by about 50%. For smaller breeds like diamond doves or very small fancy pigeons, reduce dosages by about 1/3. Now let's talk about what results you should realistically expect, and what timeline to anticipate. Mullein is not a fast-acting pharmaceutical. It works gently and progressively. If you're using Mullein for prevention during a damp season, you may not see obvious changes because you're preventing problems from developing in the first place. The measure of success is that birds remain healthy without respiratory symptoms. If you're using Mullein for mild existing symptoms, here's a realistic timeline. Day 1 to 2, you likely won't see dramatic changes. The compounds are beginning to work, but mucus takes time to thin and expel. You might notice the bird seems slightly more comfortable, or is breathing a tiny bit more easily. Day 3 to 4, you should start seeing more obvious improvement. Nasal discharge may increase temporarily as mucus is being expelled. This is actually a positive sign. The bird may sneeze more as airways clear. Breathing should sound clearer with less wheezing or rattling. Day 5 to 7, significant improvement should be evident. Discharge should be decreasing or cleared. Breathing should be quiet and easy. Energy levels should improve. The bird should be more active and showing better appetite. By day 10, if you've been treating consistently, respiratory symptoms should be largely resolved for mild to moderate cases. If you don't see any improvement by day 7, or if symptoms are worsening, this indicates the problem is more serious than Mullein can handle. This is when you need veterinary intervention. Mullein works for mild cases and supportive care, not for severe infections.
Let me address some common questions that come up regarding wormwood use. One question is whether wormwood can be used at the same time as chemical dewormers. The answer is yes, but with caution and proper timing. If you've recently used a pharmaceutical dewormer like fenbendazole, levamisole, or ivermectin, you should wait at least 2 weeks before introducing wormwood. The reason is that both chemical dewormers and herbal preparations are processed by the liver. Using them simultaneously or too close together can overload the liver's detoxification capacity. However, wormwood can be very useful as a follow-up treatment a few weeks after chemical deworming, or as a preventive treatment between chemical deworming cycles. This approach can actually help reduce the frequency of chemical treatments needed, which is beneficial for reducing the risk of parasite resistance. Another common question is about the range of effectiveness. What parasites does wormwood actually work against? Based on traditional use and available research, wormwood shows good effectiveness against intestinal roundworms, also called ascarids. These are among the most common parasites in pigeons. It also appears effective against capillaria, commonly called hairworms, which are thread-like worms that affect the intestinal lining. There's evidence of effectiveness against coccidia, which are protozoal parasites that cause coccidiosis, though the effect may be less pronounced than against worms. However, wormwood is not particularly effective against external parasites like feather mites, red mites, or lice. These require different approaches, often including physical treatments of the loft environment. Wormwood also has limited effectiveness against trichomoniasis, commonly called canker, which is caused by a protozoan and affects the throat and upper digestive tract. For canker, other herbs like oregano are more commonly used. People also ask about safety and potential side effects. Wormwood contains thapsus, which in high doses can have neurotoxic effects. This is why absinthe, the alcoholic drink made from wormwood, was banned in many countries for years. However, the doses we're using for pigeons are much lower than the levels that cause toxicity. At recommended doses, wormwood is generally considered safe for pigeons. That said, monitor your birds when first introducing any new treatment. Watch for any unusual behavior, refusal to eat or drink, excessive sleepiness, or neurological signs like loss of balance or tremors. These would be signs of a problem. If you see any of these, discontinue the wormwood immediately and provide only fresh water. Also, as mentioned earlier, avoid use in very young squabs, laying hens, and already stressed or sick birds, and always follow recommended doses. More is not better, and excessive doses increase the risk of side effects. One of the advantages of using natural antiparasitics like wormwood is the reduced risk of resistance development. This is becoming an increasingly important consideration in animal health management. Resistance to pharmaceutical dewormers is a growing problem in livestock and poultry industries. When you use the same chemical dewormer repeatedly, you create selection pressure, parasites that happen to have genetic traits that make them slightly less susceptible to that chemical survive and reproduce, passing on those resistance genes. Over time, the entire parasite population shifts toward resistance, and the dewormer becomes ineffective. Wormwood and other natural antiparasitics work differently. They contain multiple active compounds, not just one. These compounds work through different mechanisms simultaneously. For parasites to develop resistance to wormwood, they would need to develop resistance to multiple different compounds and multiple different mechanisms at the same time. This is much more difficult from an evolutionary standpoint. It's the difference between having to develop one key to open a lock versus having to develop 10 different keys to open 10 different locks simultaneously. This doesn't mean resistance can never develop to natural treatments, but it develops much more slowly and is less likely to become complete resistance. This makes natural antiparasitics valuable tools for long-term sustainable parasite management. By rotating between natural treatments and using chemical treatments only when necessary for severe infections, you can maintain effectiveness of all your tools for longer. When sourcing wormwood, quality really does matter. The concentration of active compounds varies depending on growing conditions, harvest timing, drying methods, and storage. High-quality dried wormwood should be grayish-green in color. If it's turned brown, it's likely old or was dried improperly, and the active compounds have degraded. The smell should be strong, pungent, and distinctly bitter. If there's little smell, the herb is old or was poor quality to begin with. If it smells musty or moldy, don't use it, as this indicates contamination. Store your dried wormwood in an airtight container in a cool, dark, dry place. Light, heat, and moisture all degrade the active compounds. Glass jars with tight lids work well. Avoid storing in plastic if possible, as some compounds can leach into plastic over time. Properly stored, good quality wormwood maintains its potency for about 1 year. After that, it gradually loses effectiveness. If you're growing your own wormwood, you have complete control over quality. The timing of harvest is important for maximizing active compounds. The highest concentrations occur just before the plant flowers, typically in mid to late summer in most climates. At this stage, the plant has built up its chemical defenses in preparation for flowering and seed production. Cut the stems about 10 centimeters above the ground. This allows the plant to regenerate. Bundle stems together with string or rubber bands in small bunches, about 5 to 7 stems per bunch. Small bunches dry more evenly and are less likely to develop mold. Hang these bunches upside down in a location that's warm, dry, well ventilated, and out of direct sunlight. An attic,
a shed, or a covered porch often works well. Direct sunlight degrades some of the active compounds, so shade is important. Allow the bunches to hang for 1 to 2 weeks until completely dry. The leaves should be crispy and crumble easily. Once fully dry, strip the leaves from the stems. You can compost the stems or discard them. Store the dried leaves in jars as described above. To summarize everything we've covered, wormwood is a natural anti-parasitic herb with documented traditional use and growing research support. It contains multiple active compounds, including thujone, absinthin, and artemisinin, that work together to affect intestinal parasites. It's most effective against roundworms, capillaria, and has moderate effectiveness against coccidia. It's prepared as an infusion by steeping dried leaves in hot water, then cooling and adding to drinking water. For prevention, use cycles of 3 days on, 11 days off, particularly during spring and autumn. For treatment of known parasite problems, use a slightly stronger solution for 7 consecutive days. Always take breaks between treatment periods. Use appropriate doses and avoid use in young squabs, laying hens, and stressed birds. Wormwood works best as part of a comprehensive approach that includes good loft hygiene, appropriate population density, clean water and feed, stress management, and regular monitoring. It's not a replacement for veterinary care in severe cases, but it's a valuable tool for prevention and management of mild to moderate parasite issues. It has the advantage of reduced resistance development compared to chemical dewormers. Quality of the herb matters, so source carefully and store properly. If you found this information useful, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps other pigeon keepers find this content. If you have questions or experiences to share about using wormwood or other natural treatments, leave them in the comments below. I read the comments and they help me understand what topics to cover in future videos. If you haven't subscribed to Pigeon Healthy yet, please do so and turn on notifications so you don't miss upcoming videos. We'll be covering many more natural health topics, herbal treatments, nutritional approaches, and practical management techniques for keeping pigeons healthy. Thank you for watching, and remember, healthy birds come from good management combined with thoughtful, appropriate interventions when needed. Take care of your birds, and I'll see you in the next video.